Hi there. Lately, I've been working on building our own API platform, and I have this opportunity of designing the system and implementing it. And one of the things I always look up for are good examples where companies have done a great job in documenting their APIs and showcasing some of the great reference architectures. And Stripe always tops the chart because they have fantastic documentation. And one of the things that I like about them is the concept of domain specific IDs. And what I mean by that is if you look at this example here, when you talk about a customer ID, it is always prefixed with a domain specific name. So customer is CUS underscore. And if I go a bit down, if I show you another example of payment intent object, it starts with PI underscore. Now, I've always been looking for implementing a similar thing in my own project, which is what I'm doing right now. So I was trying to find if there are any existing stable libraries that I can use. And I came across project type ID by a company called Jetlify. And this project is inspired by Stripe IDs itself. They have done their implementation in Go language, but they also provide reference implementation in TypeScript, which is where this project is. So we are going to use this project and build the domain specific IDs for our own project. Now for this particular video, I'm going to take the example from books. So books, authors, publishers, these are some of the domain concepts. So we are going to build IDs based on that. So first thing is that we need to install this library, and I'll go back and show you that I've already done that. This is what my project structure looks like. I have package.json and I have type ID installed. I'm using Bun instead of Node.js because it provides first class TypeScript support and it's extremely fast to work with. So I'm going to use that. But if you're using Node.js, the process doesn't change because it is still based on package.json. So going back, I have this code editor where I'm going to write the code, and on the right hand side, I'm going to run my code. So I will run it using bun run index.ts. And since nothing is written, nothing is printed. So to start with, we'll go back to the project and say, okay, I want to use it. So I'll take the second example first and I will paste it here. And this is how it has been used. So let's see what ID do we get here. So console.log. And as you can see, I'm using GitHub Copilot. So I'm getting pretty interesting code completion, which helps me do things faster. So now that we have it, let's go to right hand side and run it. So we have type ID, but it's only a set of characters, but it does not encode any domain information. So in order to encode the domain information, let's see what we need to do. So we need the concept of a prefix. So let's go back and have a concept for prefix. So let's say first is what we are doing the domain ID for book. And I'm going to also add this information in type. And let me just rename this for clarity. It's book ID. And this is also book ID. And I will make this a little smaller. So let's see what ID do we get now. When I run it, this is exactly what we were looking for. So it's book underscore this ID, which if I show you the documentation from Stripe and match it, it's exactly how we want it to be. Now, if we want to encode another concept, so let's say const publisher ID. So it says publisher. And in this case, let's do console log and run the code again. So now we have book ID and a publisher ID. I will make this a little bit smaller because when it becomes too large, it becomes difficult to read. So I will clean the screen and run again. So we now have concept of book ID and a publisher ID. Now, as I mentioned that I'm going to focus mostly on the type safety aspect rather than the global uniqueness and randomness and all those things. Those goodness are coming primarily from UUID 7, and type ID.js is a superset of UUID 7. So you already get all that goodness. But I'm going to show you how the type safety comes when you start exchanging the IDs. So one thing before we go there is I would like to encode all of these types in one place so that I don't have to keep on typing it and make our code muddy. So in order to do that, I'm going to import type ID, capital D, and I'm going to take this type ID book and copy, and I will say type book ID is equals to this type ID of book, not this type ID, it's capital ID and capital T. So we've created type here, and if I try to encode, this should be fine. So now we have the concept of book ID, and we can do the similar thing here. So we can say type of publisher ID is this. So this is a publisher ID. Now, the good part with this guy is that now you can start, instead of hard coding and typing it again and again, you can just pass in the book IDs. All right, if I run the code again, everything should still work. Now we are going to add a function called add book, which is taking a book ID. See, it's taking a book ID, not a type ID of books. It's much easier to follow along. And I will say a name of a book, which is string. And then let's only do console.log at this time. And it says book with ID and name. All right, fantastic. So now we have an add book function. Let's try to add a book. And let's try to send the book ID that we created earlier. I will take these IDs and come back here, and I can just remove these console log and make it a bit clean. Okay, so we are adding a book of type this. Let's go to the code base clean. Let's go to the terminal clean and run again. It's saying I'm adding a book with ID this and the name The Alchemist. What I really like about approach by putting square brackets so that you know where the value starts and where the value ends. So you know that the book ID is between the square bracket and the book name is between the square bracket. All right, fantastic. So now the type safety parts. If I do an add book and if I pass in the publisher ID, you see how it immediately complains. And if I hover, it says argument of type publisher ID is not assignable to parameter of type book ID. This is what type safety means. So at the compile time, you're getting a fast feedback by saying that the ID that you're passing, it's not string anymore. It has a type associated and it's domain specific. So as a programmer, you should be very happy because you're getting the fastest feedback loop possible when you're doing these things. Now, on the other side, if I do a const add publisher and do the similar thing here and replace it with add publisher, this will work because it is now looking at the publisher ID. And I think I should have taken up a different publisher. So let's try to run the code again. And see, now we're getting a book ID, which has book underscore, publisher ID, publisher underscore with their respective names. So I hope that this was useful. There are other goodness that you get with the type ID. It's because these IDs are base 32 encoded, which means they are URL safe. So if you are passing them an address bar, they are easier to work with because they don't contain any character that will break your URL. The other benefit that you actually get is the double click. So for example, if I go to uuid7.com, and if I take this ID, let's say, if I go back to the code base and paste it here, let's say paste it here. And if I paste this guy here, type ID provides the ability to double click and select the entire thing. But in case of UID, if you do a double click, you only get half pieces in. You only selected the first part. You only selected the second part here. But in this case, if you do a double click, you get the entire ID, which is easier for copying and pasting and sharing across. So I hope that this was useful, and I hope that you will make use of type IDs moving forward to generate type-specific domain IDs. If this was useful, write down a comment below. What did you like about it? If there are any questions that you would like me to answer, please let me know, and I would do my best to answer those. And until then, enjoy your time, and I will see you again.